Happy Saturday, folks. Good to see you. Hope your weekend's starting out okay. Some things happened this week that I'm going to get into a little bit. Tim Pool had kind of a rough go of it, along with Benny Johnson and a few other folks. They're in the news quite a bit, and the story seems to be getting bigger. So I'm going to cover that a little bit, and then we're going to discuss some Pinecreek shenanigans from last week. So, yeah, let's get into it. All right. So let's say hello to a few people. It's early, so I don't expect a lot of people to be here live. Spooky is here. Good to see you. It's not early for him. It's, a reasonable hour there. Michael Deaton is here. Good morning, Michael Deaton. Well, Pinecreek acknowledges that he has been offered money by Russian assets for his heel turn. Be interesting if he had been. I don't think he has, though. Thanks for that reminder. All right. So, yeah, I'm just going to start off with this little bit of news here. This is from The Hill, the Rising show. Not something I follow normally, but I figured I'd just use this to get us started.
Bombshell indictment. U.S. prosecutors allege a media company linked to conservative influencers who regularly reach millions, including Benny Johnson, Tim Pool, and Dave Rubin, was secretly funded by Russian state media employees whose goal was to amplify U.S. domestic division and spread Russian propaganda. Take a listen to Attorney General Merrick Garland breaking down the indictment.
We allege that as part of that effort, RT and its employees, including the defendants, implemented a nearly $10 million scheme to fund and direct a Tennessee-based company to publish and disseminate content deemed favorable to the Russian government.
Sounds okay. Sounds fairly open and shut so far. I don't know how big of a splash this is going to make, other than the fact that I believe the implications for the participants in this would make them unindicted, well, would make them unregistered foreign agents. He's not popular enough for Russian money. He needs to make more shorts. Yeah. Good to see you, Lori. Happy Saturday to you. For real, though, he's downplayed Russia's influence in our politics and in his opinions before, but can he still do that? It's obvious the anti-trans stuff is Russian agitprop, for instance. I mean, it can be. I mean, they definitely channel it. I think in Doug's case, it's disconnected. In the same way that it's disconnected from reality.
To implement this scheme, the defendants directed the company to contract with U.S.-based social media influencers to share this content on their platforms. The subject matter and content of many of the videos published by the company were often consistent with Russia's interest in amplifying U.S. domestic divisions in order to weaken U.S. opposition to core Russian interests, particularly its ongoing war in Ukraine. The company never disclosed to the influencers or to their millions of followers its ties to RT and the Russian government.
Russia, Russia, Russia. Now, to be clear, the U.S. Justice Department does not allege any wrongdoing on the part of the influencers themselves. Instead, it's accusing these two employees of Russia Today of funneling $10 million to a Tennessee-based media company that created Russia-friendly content, what they describe as Russia-friendly content. The indictment did not name the company that was widely believed to be called Tenet Media. Podcaster Tim Pool released a statement on X, writing in part, quote, "Should these allegations prove true, I, as well as the other personalities and commentators, were deceived and were victims. I cannot speak for anyone else at the..."
Tim Pool claiming to be a victim, not an uncommon thing.
The company as to what they do or to what they are instructed. Culture War podcast was licensed by Tenet Media. It existed well before any license agreement with Tenet, and it will continue to exist after any such agreement expires. The only change with the agreement was that the location of the live broadcast moved to Tenet's YouTube channel. I and TCW never produced any content for Tenet Media. He also added, "Putin is a scumbag. Russia sucks." Meanwhile, Benny Johnson said on X, quote,
he also, but let's keep in mind that Tim Pool has also said that Ukraine is America's greatest threat. So, I mean, take almost anything that you hear from Tim Pool with a giant grain of salt. Are we thinking Doug got funded by Tenet? No, I don't think he got funded by Tenet. The Justice Department doesn't allege any wrongdoing on the influencers' parts themselves yet. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the focus is to go after them. The two influencers that are involved, and one of them it's Chen, or whatever. She worked for the Blaze, and she's one of the people that heads up Tenet Media. So she's one of the victimizers, I guess. Maybe she wasn't really considered an influencer, but I thought that was kind of her position when she was over it. She used to be a contributor at the Blaze or producer, something like that. So, yeah. So, yeah, that's going on right now. What I thought was interesting is that there's a lot of different talk and commentary on this, and I've only followed little bits and pieces of it. But Tim Pool and Benny Johnson and Dave Rubin, I think, represent some of the worst, other than who's the one guy? Crowder. It seems like Crowder's influence has diminished since those videos of him interacting with his wife came out. Yeesh. All right. So that's it for the news, I guess, first thing this morning. I apologize. I'm having my breakfast while I do this, so you'll excuse shots of the smoothie. Let's get rid of that. Let's see here. So Pinecreek was over on P.F. Jung's show, and I'm not a normal watcher of P.F. Jung's stuff. But this is them yucking it up over there with a call-in show where they decided to take questions, provide answers, ask questions, and do combat. Really get into it, mix it up with some callers on there. And there's not much on here that I thought was all that interesting, except for this exchange that happens when this one guy comes in here. I'm going to play that bit of it, and we're going to get into this a little bit. It is relevant to the political times. I have seen Doug have conversations with Paul from P.F. Jung. I can't say that I would be a fan of his content. I went to when I was tagging him in the description, I went to his site. And the intro video that he has is pretty gross. So, yeah, not great. Seems like the kind of person Doug would follow. So, Robin says, I'm at Kentucky Free Thought. Just spoke to Seth Andrews. Oh, that's cool. Yeah. I don't think I've ever spoken with him before. I've had countless younger veterans shit talking Ukraine. I always wonder what the hell. Yeah, I don't get that either. It does not make sense to me. Michael thinks that GOP politician is going to be charged soon. Maybe. I guess it depends on how big it gets. I haven't read enough into it to know if it's gotten that far, but I would be surprised if it goes any further than just the company. But they'll end there'll probably be more. I mean, this isn't going to be the only operation that Russia's got some adjacent money getting funneled into. I mean, this is stuff that we've done to other countries have done to us. Russia is definitely pushing this hard on their part. So they've really gotten into the right wing troll game. So when is Doug going to wear a beanie? It's too warm in Arizona for a beanie like that. He'll have to wear some kind of like microfiber, skull cap or something like that, which could be that could be a look. All right, so here we go. So this is them in their conversation. This is from like a week ago, I think. So let's see here.
Go ahead, John. Sorry.
It seems, Paul, for you, you're kind of in favor of voter ID for you. And I think Doug as well. You say it makes sense. Like, why shouldn't we have some sort of ID or verification? Is that kind of correct?
Yeah, of course. I don't even.
Doug, same for you.
Oh, sorry. I was. You're talking about voting. You need ID.
Yeah, like, are you in favor of the voter ID stuff?
Yeah, I think so, because I really don't want these Trump voters to cheat.
Funny. This is going to be funny. So, what's it? Democracy Enjoyer. the guy down there in the center middle, middle center, he if he's asking about voter ID, that is very specific. So let's see if it stays that way between Paul and Doug.
Nice. That's
Me neither.
clever.
See what I did there, Paul?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. So
It's not as good as you think. The two of them congratulating each other throughout is interesting. Do conservatives want IDs for purchasing firearms? Probably not. Well, some do. Background checks and stuff like that. That's been shown to be kind of popular, or polling more popularly with people across political divisions. So I don't know.
with the whole voter ID thing, the way
Right.
or the reasoning behind, of course, why I am kind of against it. The whole thing is for democracy to work and actually function as intended, you actually want as many people as possible voting. So it's the whole representation piece of it. I mean, the reason why we have a democracy is to, represent the population and their aims, their needs, their goals.
Okay, John.
So getting into the why
Why is he calling him?
ID is bad is it disenfranchises voters, essentially, cutting down the population of eligible voters. So of course people
He's not wrong. I mean, and generally, and so as far as what we're talking about is voter ID, I don't think that Paul or Doug will make the distinction about this.
will bitch and moan like, oh, what are you saying? Like,
I'm
poor people
salivating.
don't know how to get an ID. Of course they do. They just go to the DMV, yada, yada, yada. However, we do have an actual history in this country of doing this exact thing of disenfranchising voters. So there's a real world example. And
By requiring driver's license?
No, by requiring the kinds of ID that usually see. Okay, so let's start from the top. The idea that you want to maybe help your citizens provide them with an ID or credentials so they can prove their citizenship, I'm entirely in favor of. I think it's a great idea. However, we don't exactly live in that kind of a country. So one of the things that's going to pop up here, this will happen. Doug and Paul are going to raise objections to the fact that there isn't a system in place for voter ID. There are 50 minimum. We'll keep it simple. We'll keep it to the 50 states for the purposes of federal elections. There's at least 50 systems. Okay. Because the federal government you do not vote directly into the federal government when you vote locally. I've talked about this before, and it's very important to understand this. If you are talking about voter ID, which is local polling places requiring you to show some form of approved photo or non-photo ID, depending on the state that you're going to, then you're talking about 37 states already do this. So it's a non-issue for those 37 states. So the only thing Paul and Pinecreek need to take on are the 14 states that don't ask for physical ID. They're the minority states. Several of those states are quite conservative in kind of a movement conservative, big government's bad government kind of mode, and others are very left-wing, progressive, whatever, however they get labeled, like California. They do still have requirements. They do still require voter registration, but they don't require you showing photo ID at the polls. They verify your voter registration at the polling place. So this winds it back, okay? So that layer that we're talking about just with this is just people showing their ID at the polling place, whether or not they can be denied there. So 37 states require that, not an issue. 14 don't. Okay. Let's zoom in on those 14 that don't. What are they doing? How are they verifying it? Well, they verify it based on based on voter registration rolls. And usually that's done by comparing either a signature they have on file, an attestation that they've signed, some kind of registration that they've done, right? And now the federal government only has one requirement. So all of these voting things that are happening by states are done by the states and then administered locally at county levels, right? County and local levels, even for a federal election, right? The one federal, well, there are federal guidelines, but one federal requirement for any registration for all states is a declaration, basically attested by the individual signing on that registration. They are affirming under the penalty of perjury that they are a U.S. citizen. And if, penalty of perjury, that's a Class C felony for them, fines, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know how often that gets prosecuted, but it has in the past. So that's essentially the one bare minimum that the federal government puts on there. The vast majority of the states can add extra requirements on there because they are the ones who are administering the system. So most states require more than just that attestation. They require some kind of proof of physical ID that shows citizenship. Now, if they don't require it for U.S. citizenship, then it would be in the minority of cases where it's a city. There's municipal elections where they don't require a person to be a U.S. citizen, but they do have to show that they're a resident of that city. And they are not voting in federal or state elections. They're not voting for any of that. They don't get to decide, though. They're voting on city issues only. Okay, that has to be kept in mind. So with that perspective in mind, when we're talking about the system, most of these issues have already been dealt with. They continue to get dealt with in different ways. If the concern is trying to find a uniform system of ID for citizens, that is very different than the motivation behind voter ID, because voter ID comes from a motivation to make sure that the wrong people aren't voting, or sometimes maybe the right people aren't voting the wrong way, however they want to put it. That is less of an issue. And the amount of money that usually tries to get thrown at this is despite the legislation, it costs a certain amount of money. Most of this gets passed on to the individual. You have to jump through more hoops in order to exercise your right to vote. That's what makes these efforts contentious, because you have a right to vote. Now, the government administers it so that they can place requirements on certain things, certain restrictions, because they want to be able to ensure who you are at their state level. That stuff has been upheld, but it's always being debated in this context of, you have to bear in mind, this is a right that you have as a citizen. So if you are running the risk of disenfranchising citizens of their right to vote so that you can catch a tiny fraction of people who are actually willing to risk a Class C felony and perjury by casting one fake ballot, you have to weigh that. All right. So with that in mind, let's push forward and see where we go with this. It must be a different morning in Canada than it is here. We didn't get a good one. That's from Good Morning from Canada. Voter ID has an excessive impact on the elderly and racial minorities because of the inherited effects of redlining laws. Yeah, in some states, definitely has that effect. Plus, there's these shenanigans. Kentucky won't accept student ID, but take hunting licenses. I think that was an issue that popped up in Texas. I think it's an issue still in Alabama. We'll do that. And I think in Alabama, I don't even think the hunting license is a photo ID. I can't remember, one state did that. They wouldn't accept a student ID that had a photo on it, but they'd accept a hunting ID or an NRA membership card. And I don't think they didn't have photos. I can't remember what story that was, what state that was, excuse me.
Well, having any form of ID is one thing.
All right, hold on. All right, I want to let Doug cash in on this. Just to be clear, Doug, I would have anticipated that John would have been in favor of voter ID because he's a sharp guy. He's pro Second Amendment, right, John?
Yeah, I'm not a flaming liberal.
Okay,
yeah,
so
well, sounds like it. But
so John, you said you wanted to have the most people vote as possible. You said, right?
There's almost nothing more meaningless than saying you're pro Second Amendment, because it depends on what you mean. I'm pro Second Amendment based on the original definitions that were upheld by the Supreme Court for 70 years. I do not believe in the current interpretation of it because it's changed radically.
Essentially,
Okay.
that's the idea.
So should we lower the age?
No, we still have an age of majority for a reason. There's
What's the reason?
Why at some point do you have to be considered an adult versus a child?
I actually don't really agree with this. This will probably become a short. I don't know that being 18. I as far as I know, the reason that 18 is the normal vote is because of selective service. I think requirements. You're required to vote. You're required to register for selective service. So at that point, you might as well be legally recognized to vote. I'm not convinced that there's some kind of magical maturity moment at the age of 18 that makes you a better voter than, say, a 25-year-old or even a 55-year-old, or given the voting statistics coming out of Florida, a 75-year-old. So the idea that, you know, we couldn't lower it to 15, I don't see why that would be a problem.
Yeah, but what's the why 18? Like 16, 17? Why not those ages?
I mean, you're asking.
We can if you live in a state, as far as I'm concerned, in a lot of states, you can start having a job at about the age of 14 or 15. I think it should be based on that. Right? Once a kid can start earning money, earning a paycheck, you know, actually legally working for an employer on payroll, then yeah, maybe they have the right to vote.
Expand the number of voters.
Sure, but being an adult in this country, or in any country really, is its own distinct stage of life where you are responsible now for your own well-being, and you're.
John's partially right here. I mean, it's the distinction essentially. You become a legal adult. You can be tried as an adult, but you can be tried as an adult depending on the crime at the tender age of 15 or 16. The current shenanigan, the current horrible incident that happened in Alabama, I think that individual down there in that state can be tried as an adult at the age of 14. So there's arguments for and against this. I'm not entirely getting won over by John's argument here.
I mean, you're a citizen before you become 18, but now you have an actual say in the process. Now, there's like a certain point where you become old enough to have that say. Is
like most kids when they're 16, some of them are very political and very aware. And there's some 20-year-olds who have no clue what's going on. Wouldn't you rather have a 16-year-old who's well versed in the political arena versus a 20-year-old who doesn't know what they're doing?
I would say it doesn't matter. Like I don't like the idea of sort of the low information voter, but if you're a U.S. citizen, whether you're low information or not, you have the right to vote, right? Like, now I gave Doug some static about this because I wanted him to go back to Canada, but that's not because he's a citizen. He just became a citizen, and he's already demonstrating signs of the chronically low information voter. But he has the right to vote. He's now a citizen, recognized in the United States. He has the right to vote any way he chooses. The idea of trying to make it about, well, wouldn't you rather have a politically savvy 16-year-old voting than, say, a politically ignorant 40-year-old? Well, maybe, but that's not the point. The point is, as American citizens, when is that enfranchised? When do they have the ability to have a say at all? Doug is kind of, I think, more agreeing with the point that I'm making, that it doesn't seem to make much more sense to say, well, the reason we want an 18-year-old voting and not a 16-year-old voting is because the 18-year-old is wiser. We can find plenty of examples of middle-aged people who are clearly not very wise when it comes to choosing who to vote for.
And thinking about politics?
I mean, you could say that, sure, but I don't really think of it like that. I think once you're an adult, you should be able to live as you please. So
Okay. I agree with that. I don't know about the voting age angle, Doug. I think there's a better.
Okay. New angle. I have a lot of friends who are pretty high up in the Republican Party. And I'm against this. I just want to say this. I'm against this. But they have told me that they're organizing a huge fraud coming up this November. Any ideas, John, on how we can stop this? You know what they're doing? They're going to get all the Republican immigrants that came across and say they're citizens when they're not.
How is that going to allow them to vote?
How do we stop this?
Did they successfully get them registered? How did they get them registered in the state of Arizona? He's not limiting it to Arizona, but if he personally knows these people, I know he does live in Arizona. My guess is that these are Republicans that are more or less regional, and he's talking about collecting Republican sympathizers that are illegal immigrants. There wouldn't be illegal immigrants. They would probably be asylum seekers. How are you going to get an asylum seeker registered in Arizona? Does Doug know how to get registered in the state of Arizona? Because that's step one, is fraudulent registration, not voting.
We already have voter registration. So I'm not the most well-versed on how each minute detail works, but
Yeah, but
Have fun, Robin. Good to see you.
you know what they're going to do? They're going
We need to
they're going
do
to
this.
they're going to register. They're going to go to the DMV or wherever, and they're going to register, and they're going to just say they're a citizen, and and when they're asked for proof, they say, "I don't have it on me. Sorry."
Okay, that's acceptable where Doug lives. Like, again, the federal requirement is that they attest that they're a U.S. citizen. They have to do that. So they're basically putting their name to something, saying, "All right, under penalty of perjury, Class C felony, I swear that I'm a U.S. citizen." That's bare minimum requirement from the federal government. Most states have more requirements than that, but that's the basic one. I think the only exception to this is maybe Oregon and Washington. I don't think Oregon and Washington care. And as states, they can do this. They have the federal requirement, and there is the bare minimum. As a state, they don't ask for ID. I think you could check on that and correct me, but based on the information that I've looked at, and I'd be interested to see what the statistics are of voter registration fraud in the states of Washington and Oregon. Last time I checked, it is not an issue, but who knows, right? But where he's talking about where this could happen, where he lives in the Southwest, how does somebody get registered this way? I'm pretty sure in Arizona, not only are you attesting that you're a U.S. citizen under penalty of perjury, but you have to show some kind of proof of residence, whether it's a state-issued ID, birth certificate, social security number, some kind of long-term proof of residence. You have to show something, whatever the state has decided that they want as a requirement.
But they're going to see if they're going to get away with it. Should we just hope that they can not get away with it?
Why would you need to run the experiment? The rate of people who would want to risk this for what gain? It's a Class C felony if you get caught. If you don't get caught, you get to vote once. The risk isn't worth the reward. It's the reason why, first of all, voter registration fraud is probably not that high anyway. And the only reason I say probably is because I'm relating that to people willing to cast a ballot fraudulently, which is a different step. And depending on the state that they live in, they might be trying different shenanigans to try to get away with that. That rate is low too. So I don't understand why this is the issue. That's the real problem. Doug seems to think, well, anyone could just go and do this. No, they can't. They can attempt it, but they're not going to really. What are they going to succeed at doing? They're going to be attesting to a crime first, and then hoping that they later get to cast a ballot. And the way he's saying is like, oh, they just show up and then they register and then get to vote. Well, that's in states where you have same-day registration. That's a different issue. Not every state has same-day registration and voting.
I mean, this presumes that every election ever has had this level of fraud because we haven't needed it.
Oh, no, maybe not. I'm saying it's coming in the future.
It's coming in the future based on what? What is your justification for that concern? If it's based on previous elections, then that doesn't make sense because the rates have been really, really low. And I mean very low. The federal estimate is something like 0.00 something. It's low. And that is the rate of attempts, not the rate of success. I had to use my birth certificate to get my license in Arizona, and that's when I registered to vote. Yeah. I live in Michigan. The rules have gotten tighter since I first registered, because I got registered to vote, I believe, with my select service registration, all that kind of stuff. But it was all based on whether or not I was a legal citizen or not. Now, I believe you have to show proof of, you need a driver's license or a state ID. I'm pretty sure it's a driver's license first. If you don't have that, you need a social security number. If you don't have that, you can put in for what they call like a temporary thing, where they try to like find out, they try to determine what your citizenship is, and you get like a temporary number. And if they can't prove it, you're off the rolls. So that's my understanding of how it currently works in Michigan. And we do have voter ID laws. You have to show your ID at the polls as well. So not only did you have to prove with ID that you were, in order to get registered, you had to show it again when you go to vote. It seems to me that most of the states have a process like this in mind. Again, 37 states require ID at the polls. Most of those states also require ID and proof of registration, proof of citizenship upon registration. So this is only an issue. Again, this is not a one system is bad and someone can infiltrate it. This is, there might be, of the 50 states, 37 states don't seem to be a concern. 14 of them might have a problem. I want to know from Pinecreek or Paul, which 14 are the most vulnerable, and of them, how high are their rates of voter fraud and voter registration fraud. And you could start with Washington and Oregon first, since they seem to be the easiest ones to get registered in.
The Republicans are planning to cheat. How are we going to stop this, John?
Why?
It depends on the state that they're planning to cheat in, Doug. It's not a one solution thing. It depends on the state. Hey, good to see you back.
Hasn't it been done previously is what I would ask. I'd say, well, if
because we haven't had all the Republican immigrants coming across like we have in the last 3.5 years.
So just change that word to Democrat immigrants, and then try to smell what Doug is cooking here. It's still not a legitimate concern. What is a Democrat immigrant? Oh, it's an immigrant that can be persuaded to vote for Democrats in an election. Okay, maybe they are amenable to trying to cast a vote. So hand them the paperwork and then get them indicted. Class C felony. It should be called a Class C felony. Just see if they're willing. Like, hey, are you willing to try to register to get voted? It's a felony, right? Like, your chances of getting citizenship are gone if you get caught doing this. Like, not only are they gone, like they're gone forever. You are getting deported. You will not be allowed back in.
Then no, we've had illegal immigrants coming over for as long as this country's existed. Presumably, if this plan
they've done internal polling. My friends, the high ups of the Republican Party, have done polling, and actually, the vast majority of the immigrants who have come across the border the last 3.5 years, I know this is a shock to you, but they're Republican. They're
Catholic, a lot of Catholic.
Yeah, they lean far right, and they're going to try, and probably the vast majority will fail.
Half of this is serious. The other half of him is gaslighting John.
But all you need is a few thousand here and there could swing in the swing state.
It's only going to be at a state level. They're all done at the state level, you weirdo. Good God, man. This is not this is already horrible.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I just don't buy that because.
But let's say, hey, John, let's say it's true.
Hypothetical.
Let's say it's true. Indulge in my hypothetical. Fine. I always get accused of doing what John's doing and trying to resist the hypothetical. First of all, you've got evidence that people are coming over here and they're leaning Republican. Okay. In this hypothetical, how do they get registered, Doug? How do they get registered? They have to go wherever that's going to be. It could be the DMV, it could be Secretary of State, however they call it in that particular state. And then they are doing what? Are they going to sign up for? Do they have to sign up for a driver's license first? Or do they need to show proof that they've got a social security card? Do they need to have their birth certificate with them? In that state, how do they get registered? Are they even going to get that far? In most of those states, probably not. It is very, very hard for them to get through. Are there a minority of states where all they have to do is go in and like I said, that minimum requirement, they attest under penalty of perjury that they are U.S. citizens and they are good to go? Is that all that state requires? Like I said, there may only be 2 that have that, Washington and Oregon. And from my understanding, Washington and Oregon check your background. Other states do this as well. Like they'll take the attestation part, but even if they don't ask for proof right there at the spot, they will try to check your background. If they can't find it, they'll follow up later with you. Like, who are you? Do you have any proof? What's going on? How long have you been here? Are you a U.S. citizen? You're attesting that you are under penalty of perjury. What are you going to do with that? Like, right? This is the problem with this hypothetical. How do they do it? Like, they just show up. They're Catholic Latinx population, and they're all leaning right, and they're all like, yeah, we're here and we're voting for Trump. Show me where to go vote. And these Republicans that Doug knows are like, oh, right this way. We'll help you commit massive voter fraud. By the way, each of you are attesting to being U.S. citizens when you're not. So if you get caught, which the chances are pretty good that you will, not only does your ballot not count, you will be deported and you will never be allowed back in. Are you willing to take that chance to go vote in this election? For me, right? Like, these are Republican politicians. My guess is they're like, hey, I want your vote. I don't care if you commit a crime for it. Yes, according to Republicans who definitely have conducted extensive polling of migrants crossing the border, most are Republican voters. I mean, here's the thing. I'm willing to entertain that hypothetical for Doug's thing. I'm not willing to entertain a hypothetical that doesn't have a mechanism in it. How are they going to do that? He doesn't even understand what it is. As far as I can tell, Doug thinks there's one voter system. That's what it sounds like he and Paul are talking about. There's just one voter system, and that's how everybody gets to vote. And it's like, no, you have 50 different systems with different levels of security and different types of procedures going on. I mean, some of the variations aren't that big. Like I said, 37 of them, they want an ID as soon as you go vote. And the registration process is at least as strict. So you might as well just count those ones out. So what are we talking about here? Well, what we want to make sure are the 14 states that are lagging behind don't have an influx in these Republican-leaning illegals who are asylum seekers. They're not going to be able to prove their citizenship. The paperwork that they have is either from their home country, is a combination of paperwork they have from their home country and their asylum papers here, their court date. How are they going to get registered to vote?
Yeah, let's say it were to be planned and this is what they're planning to do. The question still remains, how would you stop it?
How would they do it? It depends on how. I can't answer the hypothetical. How would you stop it? The way that I would stop it is by providing things like voter registration, penalties for attesting to being a U.S. citizen when you in fact are not, requirements for proving your U.S. citizenship, which multiple states do. The majority of states already do this. That is how I would stop it. That is how it gets stopped now. I can't believe you got to like schoolhouse rock this explanation across to them. Like, I realize it's not totally intuitive because, like I said, it's not one voting system. It's 50 different states with their own regulations and their own protocols. But it's still not that tough. Good to see you, Carlton. Good morning. And Doug, let's call it ideology. Doesn't want them voting because they're a bunch illegals. Doesn't matter if they're conservative. Right. I mean, well, he also wants soldiers standing at the border, physically pushing them away. I don't know if you saw that one, but that was in his 41 questions video. Would you be in favor? Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was a short that he did or something. I can't remember when I covered it. Oh no, it was this question to Kamala Harris. Are you okay with them pushing the immigrants away from the border? Like,
I would say
sure.
that our systems in place for voter registration, again, I don't know every minute detail, but I assume that they're in place in a functional capacity to prevent massive fraud. Again, like we could look in the past, we've investigated fraud in the past. We're doing that right now.
John, but
fraud.
part of the process of voter registration is showing ID, yes?
Depends on the state.
Depends on where you are. I mean, for me, I didn't have to show an ID when I registered.
Okay, so you could be an immigrant from a country
but did they run a background check on them?
Other than the United States, who's not a citizen, not show your ID and vote, is what you're saying.
See, I think that shows your ignorance of how registration works, because you can't just magically appear and make stuff happen. I have been in this country for my entire life. I have a social security number. I have a history of paying.
And they can see that when they run a background check on you. There are states that do that. I don't know what state he's from, but if he is like from Oregon or Washington, it is much easier to register to vote. I'll give that to Doug. Yes, you still have to make an attestation under penalty of perjury that you're a U.S. citizen. So if you're lying, you're in trouble. You're automatically breaking the law just at the point that you register. So they're no longer talking about voter ID laws. They're now talking about voter registration fraud. So this has already creeped over into a different conversation. So this is just about them trying to clamp down on the entire process. I would argue this. There is no point in Paul or Doug being in favor or against voter ID laws at the polls if the voter registration process for them is broken, right? If you fix the voter registration process, if you were to create a federal standard for voter registration that required strict requirements for proving your U.S. citizenship in order to be registered in the first place, then once you're assigned that registration number and you've been authenticated by that particular state and by federal government rules, then that's what you need to show when you go in to vote. So do you need to even bother show? That's how it works in Michigan. I have a voter ID number, a voter registration number. It's unique to me as a voter. I think it used to be back in the past, that was all you needed. My understanding is now that you need a picture ID. Or I think in some cases, if you don't have that, you have to show some proof of residency or something like that, so that they can look up where you live, check the roster with that. If it's not current, they may not let you vote. That, I think, is the other avenue. If it is up to date, then they will. But I think if they let you do that without ID, I think they give you a provisional ballot, which they reserve the right to cast out. So again, registration, then voting, then having the ballot. Just because you manage to get registered and then manage to cast a ballot doesn't mean that ballot gets counted. There's three minimum steps going on here in this process. And in this whole thing that they're talking about, they're completely missing. At this point, the only one that kind of knows what he's talking about is John. Because Paul and Doug seem to be, at least I haven't gotten the impression, that they understand that there are 50 separate voting systems, minimum. There are federal guidelines, and then there's all the 50 states' different rules and regulations for how they want you signed up. This guy just admitted it. So for Doug to be like, aha, gotcha. You didn't have to show your ID in your state. Okay. How many states are like that, Doug? Have you figured that out? And if he didn't have to show an ID, do you know, Doug, that they didn't do an investigation into him? Do you know that because a lot of states will reserve the right to run a background check on you. And if they can find your social security number and stuff through the background check, then they'll authenticate it. Is that what his state's doing? And if that's what his state's doing, Doug, do you accept that? Do you want the state doing that kind of investigation? Because if he does, Fine. There are a lot of conservatives that don't want that. You can't go looking into my past. What, run a background check on me? All I wanted to do was exercise my right to vote. Well, you can't. Big government's got to take a look and see what you've been up to.
Paying taxes. I have a paper trail of all
A
this
paper trail, you say?
Do you have any ID to back up these claims? Now, hold on.
It's a background check. These guys are way too smug to be talking about this the way they're talking about it. This is profoundly ignorant.
Hold on, because Doug, you're getting this is. Let me take it.
He's a
Smugsville. It's Smugsville and it's cringe. Yeah. Because Doug is engaging in childish hypotheticals when he doesn't understand how voting works.
admitting that you need a paper trail in order to vote,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So John,
In some states, the only thing that I know, and I'm gonna give this one to Doug because this is gonna melt his cookie, right? The only thing that I know that a state absolutely requires coming from the federal government is the statement of attestation. After that, they could just let you vote. Once you've done that, once you've signed off saying, I swear I'm a U.S. citizen under penalty of perjury, you can go vote. Imagine a state that only requires that. First of all, as far as I can tell, that's 100% legal. If Doug has an issue with that, then what Doug has to then come up with is the imposition of more federal requirements on the states. But because the states are responsible for administering voting for the citizens of those states, they set the rules. They have that minimum guideline, that minimum federal requirement, and then they have the other rules that they put in there. If they want to be as liberal as possible, they can do that. If they want to clamp down, they really want to zero in and make sure, I want to make sure that we know exactly who the U.S. citizens are. To some extent, they can do that. I don't know if any of those have ever been resisted in court cases or anything, but normally in terms of the state going to certain lengths, whatever lengths, to prove that you are in fact a U.S. citizen, they can do that. Background checks, proof of ID, social security number, etc. They've been able to do this. How do we know this? Because the majority of states have these in place. They already have these in place.
what is wrong?
You need to be a citizen, yes, and presumably with, again, I don't know every single detail, but when you register, they check, hey, does this person exist? Is this person real? Are they dead or alive? Oh, okay.
Are they a
cool.
citizen? Right? Are they a citizen is another one.
Right. And like I said, the bare minimum requirement from the federal government is you have to get them to swear on paper that they are one. So if you find out later that they're not, you can hold them criminally accountable for it. Would Doug support banning voter purges by a number of months before X number of months before an election? I doubt it, because that's a tactic states are using to rig elections. I mean, it's been controversial, right? Because oftentimes, you take a look at who gets purged. Yeah. That and raiding grassroots registration causes. Yeah. Yeah, and I've never understood verifying signatures. The signature on my driver's license does not match my current signature. It's evolved over time. I don't know how they do that either, but normally I think they keep multiple over time. If I remember correctly, like I said, I've had some people that have volunteered here, and I think they have more than one sample. So that's here where they would actually do that. And my understanding is I think they only bother to go for signature verification. It's like usually a component of stuff. I don't know which states would use it just on its own.
Yeah, why don't you? What's the issue, John, with just having citizens vote? I mean, I don't understand.
He doesn't have a problem with that.
What do you mean? I want more people to vote. Like, what do you?
He only wants citizens to vote. That's a dishonest question. So Paul was not listening.
Trying to say?
Well, no, hang on. You
I
had to
want
ask him
less
point blank.
people to vote.
Ask him point blank. Are you okay with non-citizens voting who live in the
No.
United States?
What
Okay,
if they're
good.
legal immigrants who live in the district and are counted for census purposes? which they are. Do you think they should be entitled to vote?
They're not citizens, dude. That's just for census taking.
No, I think only citizens should vote.
Okay, then John, let me ask you this: why not have simple ID to just make sure?
At what point? See what I mean? When they vote or when they register. They've completely lost track of this conversation. And by they, I mean Paul and Doug. When? Most states require it both times. The majority of states require ID when you register and when you vote. Like I said, 37 states have the voter ID laws. And that's when you have to present some form of ID, picture or non, whatever the state requires, when at the time that you vote. That's not also including any ID that you needed to show in order to successfully register to vote in advance. Or in the states that have same-day registration, what you need to provide them in order to be able to get registration. Most of those states, if they have same-day registration as well, my understanding is you get a provisional ballot. And they will throw it out if you do not follow up with the necessary proof of citizenship. If you don't follow up with that within, say, like a week's time, your ballot is chucked. It's already they already put a pin in it. It's in the provisional ballots. Like this one's ready to torch, and if they don't get proof back, it's gone.
Because we already have registration.
Okay, then what? But
you just admitted you don't need ID for registration.
It doesn't matter if you don't.
Jesus. He didn't need it in his state, but that doesn't mean they don't have the. John doesn't seem to understand that, like the nuances of this. Just because he didn't need ID does not mean the state did not verify his citizenship for him. That's the trick. To what extent are states verifying this ID? And there's 50 different ones you need to investigate, not one. My question to Paul and to Doug, do you want to see all of the states' voting mechanisms replaced by one giant federal system? Yes or no? With one standard.
Need ID for registration. You still need to register, and non-citizens.
What is the purpose of registration, though? What is the purpose of registration?
To verify citizenship. That was the point. It's to verify citizenship in advance and normally to provide them with a voter number. That allows them to show at least that at the time they go to cast a ballot, that can be registered. They have a signature on file. They have an attestation that they are a U.S. citizen. They have a name. They have some kind of address. That's part of their initial registration. That also gives them, that with that number, they craft a card that tells that person where to vote. What are their districts? Otherwise, how do they know who they're voting for? You don't just go in and vote for Kamala and Doug. You're voting based on where you live, the district that you live in. That's the purpose of registration too. Do you count as a resident, citizen or not, for that particular district? Are you voting for candidate of District 07 or candidate for District 05? Is Paul Canadian too?
Just to verify.
Again, I don't know every minute.
I guess I just don't understand what just morally.
You could just leave it there. I guess I just don't understand. Yes, you don't understand what you're talking about.
Fundamentally, because you said you want more people to vote. Fundamentally,
he wants more citizens voting. He doesn't want to see citizens disenfranchised at the polls. I'm paraphrasing for him,
right?
Yeah.
I mean,
is Paul seriously thinking, wait, there's a contradiction here. You want more people voting, but you don't want any non-citizens voting. Do these and Pinecreek is looking at him like, oh, this is an example of the insanity of the left wing, even though John came out earlier, I think, and said he's not a lefty. So I'm trying to figure out now how they're doing this. Do Paul and Doug understand the percentage of voters that turn out to vote is not even close, usually, to the number of total voters Well, usually it's in the federal elections, it's usually over half. But it's not close to the total number of citizens there are. Right? There's the population of the United States for census purposes, the total number of US citizens within that country, the total number of them that are registered voters, and then the total number of those registered voters that actually turn out to vote. And cut those two groups in half, and that's who decides who's president, roughly speaking. The vast majority of citizens do not vote. And look at Doug's face. Like, what? The population, the total number of people that voted for Trump in either case, he had more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016. But the reason they represent about 20% of the total population of the country. And he was really close to Biden. So the number of people that voted for Biden represented a little more than 20% of the population. It was pretty neck and neck. I think it was about 6 points ahead. So let's say it's 24, 25%. So 1/4 of the country voted for Biden, and less than a quarter showed up to vote for Trump. And that determined it. That's it. And that's in a federal election where the turnout's highest. And the turnout was around, 55, 58%. Divide that, and then that gives you the total number of the population of voters for that cycle. That's not a majority of US citizens. What John's talking about is increasing the number of people who have the ability to go out and vote. The number of citizens that can vote. There's lots of room to expand that. Hey, J.L. Warren. Does Jeffers know they can't hear him? Well, that's just the thing, Charlie. Doug can't hear me. He can hear me.
I mean, that's how democracy works. Yeah. I mean, the more people that vote,
Not necessarily.
the more representative those not the constituents are the people. Well, like, more people that vote, the more represented the American population is. And
yeah, but John, what if a lot of the people who vote because we don't have ID laws are not Americans? They're illegal immigrants, for example.
That wasn't the question that you started with. John,
not what's happening.
It's not. It's not. Look, so, okay. What if, consider this hypothetical, what if the reason that only about, a half of the population, less than a half of the population, actually end up so it's basically down to like one group of 20, one 20% segment of the population versus another 20% of the segment of the population are determining who our president is. Is that democratic? Well, that's the number of people that actually went out to vote. Okay. What if, just hold this in your head, what if it's possible that the scattershot system of voter regulations that we have from state to state, and the various loopholes and various hoops that we ask people to jump through, and I shouldn't say loopholes, the various hoops and requirements that we ask people to jump through, reduces that number down to that low level? And what if by reducing that level, we are reducing what actually, in John's case, we're reducing the choice that the vast majority of Americans would make? Would that be a concern then? That's what I would ask them. Like, if I could show that the reason that Trump voters did not turn out in force to defeat Kamala Harris in 2024 was because many of them live in communities and in states where the regulations are so high that they were purged from voter lists, They didn't have they had ID, but they didn't have the right kind for that voter election cycle. They neglected to update their address, their mailing address, 6 months before they voted, so they were then removed or they weren't allowed to vote, et cetera, et cetera. These are the kinds of things that can happen depending on where you live. If we found out that that kind of stuff prevented a Trump victory, would you want it changed?
How do you know?
Manufactured scare tactic saying, hey, this thing could happen. Hey, it sounds kind of scary, but people who don't understand how the process works.
Didn't you just say you don't have an understanding of the minutia? So how do I know that this is true?
Okay, at this point, then they should probably stop talking to each other.
Well, then you can go investigate registration and you can dig into the details because, Paul, I know you have the
Doug's getting impatient because John is being nuanced.
intelligence to understand it. However, you stay ignorant.
Yeah, that's nice of you, but
And not
even
knowing
Paul
the
is
details
skeptical.
of so many topics you talk about.
Of course.
And feign ignorance, saying, "Hey, we're just having a smoke sesh. We're just talking. I don't want to dig into the details. I don't want you to autistically explain to me." But then, when it comes to those details that matter, that's how
I would say that this is worse. This is one of those situations where if Paul and Doug are holding John to a double standard, right? So John's right. Paul and Doug are having a smoke sesh. They want to get into arguments with people online. That's just what they're doing. And John is like, okay, now all of a sudden you want these details. And Paul is basically, well, if you don't have these details, then what good are you? Well, do you need, I mean, I would ask Paul and Doug, do you need me as the guest to inform you how to do this? Yeah, it's Uncle Charlie's avatar pick is quite stunning. Polling station allocation is a big thing too. Less voting stations. There was an article that I saw a few years ago about the way that was being messed with down in North Carolina. In Canada, you just have to say you watched a John Candy movie and you can vote at the federal level. There's no registration ID required. Isn't that registration enough? A love of John Candy.
Just ask you for the details that matter, and you said you don't know.
Okay, so he's admitting it. He needs John to educate him on the issue. What John's saying is like, no, I don't know the nuances of this, but I haven't seen anything that indicates that this is the problem you guys are making it out to be.
Because I have trust in our institutions and our system.
Okay. So you come, okay, I see. So you're criticizing me for having a blunt session and saying, listen, I don't want to talk about it. And then you say, well, I just have trust, so I'm just going to agree with it.
So you're
okay.
You're saying, okay, Paul, you know full well how much of our society is on trust. You don't have to.
Of course.
Ignorant.
Of course.
You know.
Of course. Okay, then why were you so indignant against him? Why was Paul so indignant with John? Like, oh, you just trust them? Wait, why shouldn't John be equally as indignant? Like, wait, you don't? This is the whole point. Like, what is justifying your lack of trust in 50 different voter systems, 50 different states? What is justifying your lack of trust in the entire voting system? Based on what? What is this based on? I hope it's not Doug's hypotheticals. Well, these Republicans have told me in my hypothetical that they're just going to allow in certain illegals and they're going to get them registered to vote and then get them voting and then get those ballots counted. How? Oh, I don't know. I'm just saying it could happen. Could it? Well, that's the hypothetical. It could happen. No, I don't think it can. First, they got to get registered. Then they got to go vote. And then those votes got to get counted. At some point, red flags will pop up.
Well, it's also deductive logic, right? If we don't verify who's voting with simple ID.
Remember where this started. It started with voter ID, which is just ID presented at the ballot when you're going to cast your ballot or at the time that you're doing whatever you're going to present in terms of an absentee ballot. That is different than the registration requirements in advance of that. How are these guys going to combat somebody just showing up with fake ID? Let's say they managed to have a name on there, they figured it out, and they show up. I mean, to me, it seems like you should probably be more concerned if somebody was going to hack systems. That would be bigger because you could change hundreds or thousands of votes in one direction or the other. Talking about whether or not an individual is willing to risk a felony for the chance to cast one ballot in an election and have it happen to count one way, it's not worth their time. It's not worth their trouble. So if you're going to engage in some kind of voter fraud, you probably want to go big or go home. Imagine that, a Canadian expat who doesn't have a firm understanding of voter registration policy. The more I see of PF, the more he sounds like a Doug clone. That discussion with a Destiny fan where PF kept going back and trying to attack a topic they wrapped because he couldn't get a dunk was sad. Hadn't heard about that, but that's interesting. Oh, God. If you haven't watched a John Candy movie, then you need to take a statement signed by a justice of the peace that you've listened to at least one song by the Guess Who. Having been raised by a father who was a big fan of classic rock in this state, the Guess Who was quite popular here. I have heard more Guess Who than I care to. Sorry, not a fan.
And it's likely that fraud will increase. It's basic logic.
It's not basic.
So he thinks that the fraud will scale up with the number of voters going. The vast majority, I don't know how to explain this any differently. The vast majority of citizens don't vote. They don't turn out. It's a good election if 58% of registered voters turn out, and registered voters do not represent the total number of citizens in this country. What he would have to say at this point is like, no, it'll break down under the weight of everyone turning out to vote. How? And if you're concerned about, again, if you're concerned about this, I think that a national ID is a great idea, but not because I think that it needs to be directed at voting. The idea of voter ID is always based on this kind of pre-punitive thing, like we need to make sure that we make it really hard for people to vote, or put a bunch of hoops in front of them. That way, it weeds out the lazy, or the less inclined, or the poor, or people who don't have a car, or a variety of other reasons that just disenfranchises people. And to me, there's no reason to do that. If the government wanted a requirement for this kind of thing, the government should probably renovate the Social Security system, create a national ID plan, which this has come up before, and then provide those IDs to its citizens. Problem solved. You've got your national ID card, you go to vote, whatever locality you happen to be living in, they can look that information up and be like, yep, you're here, you're good to vote. You're a US citizen. Says so on the card. The reason they haven't put this into place? Two reasons. One, it's expensive. That's number one. Number two is that movement conservatives hate it. And by movement conservatives, it's a very important term. Movement conservatives are the ones that hate the idea of big government. They don't like the idea of a large administrative state, unless it's military usually. I've never understood their opposition to a national ID thing, especially after stuff like 9/11. I would have thought with the increase in the security state, they would be all for it, but they weren't. It sounds like Doug and Paul might be for it, but I think Doug and Paul are also believers in the deep state, so maybe not. I don't know. Maple syrup. Are you just typing things that you have on your table in front of you, Marty? I would like some maple syrup right now.
Because
Tell me how that's logic. Don't say there's no evidence for it. Tell me how logically how that doesn't follow.
It doesn't necessarily follow that because you have a higher percentage of citizens. Actually, scratch that. Just registered voters, right? Let's say that you could bump the number up from 55 to 60%, all the way up to 85, 90%. Does it follow necessarily that the rate of attempts at fraudulent voting are going to increase because you saw an increase in the number of registered citizen voters? That doesn't follow. They're U.S. citizens registered to vote legitimately within their state. So what's the problem? Well, if you can get, like, what is Paul's logic here? The more people you have involved in the voting process, the more fraud you will have. Why?
Because we already have registration.
Okay,
There already is.
This
let
is
me-
the third time we've
let
done
me
this.
try
All right,
this.
Go ahead, Doug. You
So,
can try
John,
it.
These guys are already, yeah, okay. Registration. Whatever. Registration is key, guys. The registration portion is key because the registration portion is key to you understanding that you don't have just one system.
So, John, let's say you go register to vote. Okay, you just turned 18, and I'm behind you at the DMV, and I overhear your name, and you say, "I would like to register as a Democrat." I'm assuming you're a Democrat.
Well, he doesn't say that. He just registers. He just puts that down on the form. And you don't always have to do that in every state, I don't think. I have conservative friends, and the conversation goes like this. I say I'm okay with free and readily available ID. They say, why do we need it? There's already ID. Then they say we need more ID. Yeah. To reduce fraud. When I ask where's the evidence of widespread fraud, they say it's impossible to capture. That sounds about right. Thanks for that, Max. Yeah, that's a good point. Because that comes up in the other ones. One of the things, like, wait, why not? Here's my philosophy on this. If the government or a government official like Republicans want to impose something on you, like, I want you are required to have this ID in order to be able to participate in the voting process, which is your right. Fine, provide it. Don't tell me that I have to go to this office and sign up there and go to that office and sign up there and then contact this office and wait 6 weeks to get this document so I can go back to that office and get that signed in triplicate and then grab a notary public and get this signed off. No, fuck that. If you require it, you provide it to me. This is a process that you want me to, you want for your administrative purposes. You as a politician want to make sure that only the right people are voting. Perfect. Establish a system of ID, of some kind of identification, get it canonized, get it standardized, and then provide it to all U.S. citizens. Stop half-assing it. Because if all you do is like, well, we've got a standard, we're going to pass those guidelines down to the 50 states. It's going to be up to those states to figure out how they want to maybe get you to do that. It will require a trip by bus and by train. You can only do it on the 13th of every month, except on months with 2 full moons. If you don't think that they do this kind of shit all the time. And it's especially conservatives will do this kind of shit. They complain about the administrative state, but they use it to abuse people quite often, especially when it comes to things like you trying to exercise your right. I can't emphasize that enough. Your fucking right to vote. And that's what Doug and Paul are talking about here. This is about individual citizens' rights to vote. Paul is so concerned about some upscaling in corruption that he's happy with the fact that a lot of American citizens never exercise their right to vote, or just refuse to, or are scared to, or are confused as to how. There's any number of reasons why they may not be contributing. But Doug seems to be in agreement with Paul here. Like, if you get more people involved in it, you're just going to see more corruption. Well, the level of corruption right now is so low that I think the system could tolerate that. Like, if we're at 58% voter turnout in, say, the last presidential election, and the rate of voter fraud that was captured, attempts, was something like 0.004% or 0.004%, something like that. It was really low. If you scale it up an additional 20 points, so you've got about 80% of the population showing up. Let's say that Paul's logic is okay. Well, then it follows that the rate of attempts will scale up with it. And if they do, so what? It's infinitesimally low. But then when you tell these guys, well, wait a minute, why not just enact a system where everybody has the same universal ID? We don't need to spend that on them. We were having an argument about what about how to secure voter registration. And now you won't put up or shut up. You won't put any money into it. So it's like you're all out of ideas and you've tried nothing. Like, this is not helpful. You know, they know what the solution is. The solution would be a national ID card, some kind of a real ID system that has been proposed multiple times. They won't fund it because it would increase participation in voting. That's the number one reason. And they probably can't get it to push through with movement conservatives who are like, no, that's a big federal system. Leave it to the states. Leave it as fractured as it is. Fine. So the only thing that Paul and Doug need to get over is the fact that there are 50 states, which, by the way, I'm in favor of eliminating. I think they should be rearranged.
Am I right?
No, I would not identify as a Democrat.
Okay, it doesn't matter. Okay, but anyhow,
I
so
definitely would not
I overhear
identify
your
as a
name. Then, and because you at the DMV you're at, I can guess what polling station you're going to go to, whatever. I go to the polling station and I say your name, and I vote using your name. That's bad, right?
But that's not how it works.
What do you mean it's not how it works?
You're just making up a scenario in which
He's saying that he can literally go for, okay.
this fraud can happen. But in the real world, when you go to vote, that is not what happens.
Well, let's say
Okay, John's confusing it now too, because now they're talking about different things.
they
back to
ask
this-
for.
Making up a scenario works.
What do you mean it's not how it works?
That's bad, right? And I vote using your name. I go to the polling station and I say your name, and I
To the polling station. So this isn't about registration. This is polling.
Vote.
Okay.
using your name.
2 ballots were cast in his name. Both of them get thrown away. That's what happens.
That's bad, right?
But that's not how it works.
If Doug can get away with that, what he's trying to say is he's heard John's name, and he's like, he steps up and he says the same thing. First of all, good luck getting past the poll checker, because they'd be like, wait, weren't you just, what the hell's going on? Like, I can't remember if he said he was first or John was first, but it's not going to matter. By the time the second one is giving the same name, going to be like, you just cast your vote. Both of those ballots are likely to get thrown out. It must suck to realize your position is so unpopular that you have to change the system to make it look palatable.
What do you mean it's not how it works?
You're just making up a scenario in which this fraud can happen. But in the real
That fraud could happen. Somebody could do that. I disagree with John here. That could happen. If he manages to do that, they're going to ask him to confirm the information from before. He's going to have to confirm, more than likely at most of those places, his district, or does he have a voter registration card? Does he have a driver's license? If they suspect him at all, they can ask him to step aside. If he manages to get through those additional questions and he writes up, if he has to sign anything or do anything like that so they can compare a signature, and then they give him a ballot and they send it a vote, then John steps forward and gives him the same information. First of all, Doug better hope that he's gone, that they didn't catch that, because they will call the cops on somebody doing that shit. When they catch the ballot later and they see that this person has voted twice, which has happened in the past, it is rare, but it has been caught. Those ballots get destroyed because there's obviously something hinky going on. At the very best, I think somebody would contact that person, that one person's name, and confirm their ID and confirm their vote. I don't even know if they do that. I think they just throw both away because they don't have time for that.
real world, when you go to vote, that is not what happens.
Well, let's say they ask for paperwork for, proof of registration, whatever. I say, sorry, I don't have it on me. I just came from work. I was in a rush, but
Depending on the state, you will not be allowed to get away with that. Or depending on the state. You'll be offered a provisional ballot. You'll be offered to vote on the provisional ballot. You'll be required to submit that proof within a week or so. And if you don't, the ballot's destroyed.
I'm a U.S. citizen. I want to vote, but I use your
I'm here
name
to
to do
help.
it. Do you think the systems are in place to prevent that?
In most states, yes, they are. I just described it.
Well, it depends on who's registered or not. Like, you can't just walk up and
Okay.
register under someone else's name. That's just
Now, Doug's not talking about registration. He's talking about polling. He's talking about when you go to vote. And now John's going into registration. Those are different processes.
is not how.
No. I'm saying you registered. I overheard it, and then I go vote under your name.
Jesus. Okay, so even Doug is confused. Are you talking about going someplace to register? Or are you talking about going someplace to vote? Because you can't do that in every state. You can't do them both at the same time in every state. And even in the states where you can, they're not the same thing. In most states where you can register the same day that you cast your ballot, you will have to provide proof on that site according to the state guidelines, whatever those state guidelines are, as to your citizenship. You're going to do the attestation. You're going to get that signed up. You're going to get handed a ballot. If the state allows you to vote without providing that proof up front at the day of registration, it's because they're going to hand you something like a provisional ballot. And like I said, if you do not follow up with them in the allotted time required to prove your citizenship after you've cast your ballot will be discarded. This is a very confused hypothetical from a very confused man. And now John's getting confused too, because they're not even on the same track. Were you talking about registration? Are you talking about casting a ballot? Or are you talking about casting a ballot in a state that allows same-day registration? These are three different things. You need to get on track.
But again, you're manufacturing a scenario that doesn't exist in the real world.
Partially, no.
How do you know that?
How do I know that at the polling station they're just blurting out names and letting anyone just walk up and do it?
If they
Yeah.
don't have ID, how are they validating who?
In
how
other
are
words,
they
I'm
verifying
talking
who's
about
voting?
identity theft. How do you know that people don't use identity theft to vote?
They try. The understanding is they're overwhelmingly caught. It has happened. There are people that try to take a relative's ID and vote for them after they've passed away or something like that. Doesn't work. They usually get caught. Or the ones I remember in Michigan when they were doing all the recounts, they caught, I think they caught 2 or 3 people attempting to commit fraud in the 2020 election. And 2 of them were trying to vote as relatives. And the other one, I think, was trying to vote under someone under an assumed name. All 3 were identified, all 3 ballots destroyed. And I believe charges were pressed against 2 of the 3, if I remember correctly. But that was it. Also, at least 2 of them were voting for Trump. Jefferson, he's right. Those illegals are going to start wiretapping us legals for our voter registrations. Exactly. This is like, there's no point in taking this hypothetical seriously if you can't keep on track with what's going on. What is the hypothetical about? Are we talking about people being able to get registered? Are we talking about them being able to vote? Are we talking about them being able to vote at places where they're able to register the same day? What are you talking about? If they're registered in some states, they're not required to show their picture ID because they can show their voter registration card, which they are sent, has their signature on it, has their information on it, usually an updated address on it. They can show that, and they are given a ballot, and they're allowed to vote. If Doug tried to do the same thing, like, where's your voter card? Don't have it? Get out. Oh, you don't have your driver's license. We can't help you. Oh, you don't have any of these things. Maybe the state is, oh, you don't have any of these things. Here's a provisional ballot. Vote here. It goes into that bucket over there. You have 1 week to fax us a copy of this stuff. Fax us this, or check back in with us and bring this information. And if you don't, that thing goes in the trash.
Well, now identity theft is a whole other topic.
I'm using your identity. I know your name.
You need
But
more.
there's no ID
how
card.
Identity theft works.
In most states, there is at least a registration card. This is the problem with this argument when it came down to voter ID laws, because politicians were like, some of these people are showing up and they're voting incorrect. Oh, how are they voting incorrectly? Well, all they have is this registration card that the state issues them, and it doesn't have their photo on it. Okay, but it has their signature. They're verifying who they are. What are the chances that this person has gotten a hold of this one other person's exact registration card and is using that in their place? If you were able to get a hold, let's say that's what happened, and Doug was able to get a hold of that and run to the polls and cast a vote under John's name, and it goes through, and then John shows up and he's like, you know what, I lost my wallet a couple of weeks back, and I lost my card. I have no idea where it turned out, but I'm here to vote. Lo and behold, they see that he's already tried to. That's going to raise a lot of red flags.
This is not that easy. You don't just walk up and say, I'm so and so, and then are able. So like,
John's right. You don't. It is a little bit more complicated than that. They usually, even in the states where they'll let you vote without your ID automatically, they'll do the provisional ballot. They still want to verify your name. They want to verify your address. And in often cases, they'll have you sign. They have you sign in so that they can compare that signature, so that they'd ask Doug to sign. And if he refuses to sign, they can be like, no, then you got to go. You need to sign here so we can verify your signature with what you have registered on file. There's more than one check and balance in place.
Like, when I go to vote, I have to present my ID. That's a thing. Like, are you talking about?
That's what we're talking about.
That's what we're talking about.
Oh my God, these guys are so confused. Oh my God. He didn't have to present an ID when he registered, guys. He has to present an ID when he goes to vote. So he's in the rare situation where, for whatever reason, he is in a voter ID state, but the registration didn't require him to present one of his IDs at the time of registration. Probably, as I suspected, because they run a background check on him.
What are you talking about?
Not voter ID. That's
okay. Hold on. Fair enough. What do you think we're talking about when we say voter ID?
What is John talking about? What is voter ID rule?
Talk about having to do competency tests or having to get specific IDs.
Yeah, that's different. That's different. Hold on. That is a hypothetical. That's different.
Oh, John's just confused now.
So we're all agreed. We're all for voter ID. Right. Thank you, John.
John, you got to come. Listen, you got to come prepared. You got to do your research, John. You can't just come into the blunt circle. We're just hanging out and try to start a fight when there's nothing to fight about. Okay?
We're just hanging out, but if you're just hanging, this happens when you just have a hangout. We're just having a hangout, but John needs to do his research.
Guy.
Okay.
So
all right.
Paul,
all right. I got to move on the next call, but go ahead. I'll give you the last word. Hit me. Roast me.
I was just gonna say. So you're hypothetical on. I want there to be a competency test.
Yeah. I'm not married to the competency test. I'm married to the civil service, and that may include a competency test.
Yeah, I think they're the same thing.
Get one the same. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, John, for. We all agree. Voter ID at the polling.
I'm glad we shouted at each other to, But it's not voter ID is the distinction.
John, this is why blunt sessions are so superior to debates, because we never would have got to this point unless we all kumbaya and just hung around and talk.
I'm suspicious, right? John.
All right, John. Always, please come back again, and this time have something we actually disagree on, because you're fun to argue with. All right, Godspeed, John. Peace.
You guys did disagree on. I mean, ignorance and confusion are usually good foundations for disagreement, and these guys supplied it in spades. So it worked.
How can he possibly have used the term phrase voter ID and then and make it mean competency test?
It's almost as if voter ID is not well defined oftentimes in discourse. Mostly because I think of things like people confusing registration with voting, which all three of them did.
Well, I've talked about wanting competency tests, but that's not what
I know. But that's different than voter ID. What's he talking?
He's talking. Well, there have been there were suggestions that a voter ID would be supplied upon passage of some kind of test. That's been I don't know if it's ever been proposed at like a state level, but it's a step beyond just saying, oh, well, in some cases, in some conservative circles, the idea was, well, wait a minute. If the only thing that we require for a person to prove their citizenship is a driver's license, but the state now offers driver's licenses to individuals who are here with, maybe they're asylum seekers with a work permit or they're permanent residents. Neither one of these people can be allowed to vote, but the permanent residents, especially in some states, permanent residents are eligible to get a driver's license. Well, if that's the case, then should we have another kind of ID, a voter ID, and then we can have like a little test? It's like a driver's license kind of thing. I think that has actually been proposed. It's been shot down because it's the equivalent of a poll tax. Imposing something like that on somebody is that would get shut down. And then having a test on top of it in terms of citizenship, if you can prove that you are a naturalized citizen of the country, you have the right to vote. You don't have to pass a test.
Talking about.
All right, hold on. We got a full studio here, so I need people who's got their cameras on to do you have something to argue with me and Doug about? Raise your hand.
Sure. But I already did it. So I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to call it quits. I've been on for an hour and a half. To answer your question, Warren, yes, I probably will. Very quickly, because it's like a 20-minute video. I did catch part of it yesterday. So yeah, I will probably cover that. It is the one that I saw may not be the same one. Maybe it is. It's about 21 minutes long. He shows up and I think Planet Peterson just kind of wrecks him on sort of the jump of just sort of the basic problem with presuppositional apologetics as Darth, presents it. So, but thank you everybody for joining me this early in the morning. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Have a good weekend. For those of you who already started, I hope it's going good. With that being said, I will be back. Like I said, I'll probably do a Planet Peterson one. I may not get that one done before I do some kind of live coverage of the upcoming debate. I need to text JL Warren and see if that's something that he would like to do. We talked about it, and it sounds like they're actually going through with it. It's going to be on the 10th. So maybe that's something that we can do then and hopefully have fun with it. Hopefully it's not a bad debate. I'm kind of expecting it to be a little bit boring, but yeah. So have a great weekend, everybody. Like, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff. If you got any suggestions for me, email me at jeffersonspatchcock@gmail.com. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.